This is going to be a personal reading of the book, The Lost 116 Pages by Don Bradley, for my dad, who's, just because I understand you would much rather prefer listening to books at this point instead of reading it, and I want you to be able to enjoy it with me. So, to start, The Lost 116 Pages, Reconstructing the Book of Mormon's Missing Stories by Don Bradley. Copyright 2019. Cover design by Greg Cofford Books, Inc. Cover design by Lord Zio Erickson. Okay. In memory of those I have lost, my little brother Charles, and my parents Edward and Patricia Bradley, and for those I have found, my sons Donnie and Nicholas. Introduction. Looking for what was lost. In the early summer of 1828, the sole manuscript copy of centuries of Nephite history that Joseph Smith had translated from the golden plates and lent to his scribe Martin Harris disappeared from Martin's locked drawer and was never seen again. Joseph's response to the theft of this manuscript was pure anguish. "Oh, my God," his mother recalled him exclaiming, "all is lost, all is lost." Footnote. Lavina Fielding Anderson, Lucy's book, a critical edition of Lucy Mack Smith's family memoir. So that's his source. The theft of this manuscript, comprising the first half of Mormon's abridged history of the ancient Nephites, raised fears that the thieves would attempt to use it to discredit any retranslation Joseph might do. Fears confirmed by later revelation, saying the conspirators had doctored the manuscript's words to create contradictions. Instead of retranslating Mormon's account from this manuscript, Joseph therefore replaced it with another shorter account from Nephi. The resulting book, though still published under Mormon's name, was now a hybrid. Mormon's original design for the book had been upended, and Joseph Smith's earliest words of written revelation were forever gone. For Latter-day Saints, ever since, the Book of Mormon's lost 116 pages have taken on a kind of mythical status, as if everybody knows part of the Book of Mormon is missing, but nobody knows what was in it. The surrounding mythos has spawned its own narrative of heroes and villains, with Martin Harris's wife Lucy being cast in the role of villain, or, for opponents of the faith, hero, for purportedly taking the manuscript and destroying it. The episode is often treated by former Mormons, and by irreverent observers like the creators of the South Park series, as if it is completely obvious that the skeptical smart Lucy Harris burned the manuscript, and that Joseph Smith's failure to reproduce the manuscript word for word displays a disingenuousness in his report of translating it. For Latter-day Saints, the manuscript loss and replacement take a very different meaning, displaying the hand of providence in Joseph's life. The lost manuscript hovers spectrally at the edges of Latter-day Saint consciousness as an ever-present absence, and every once in a while rumors emerge that the hole has been filled by the lost pages being found. The story behind this book. As a child, I remember learning in my primary classes that Joseph Smith lost the first many pages of the Book of Mormon, and I recall asking, baffled, what was in them? That childhood curiosity later evolved into an effort to understand the part of the Book of Mormon we do have. What insight could I gain into the second half of Mormon's narrative by better understanding the first? How would this detail enhance my understanding of the small plates of Nephi account used to replace the first half of Mormon's account? 15 years ago, I began hunting for work by other scholars on the subject and found mostly just a single brief book chapter devoted to the subject. Footnote 2. While brief, this chapter was also extraordinarily useful, providing an initial starting point for my research. It's by John A. Tvednes, the most correct book, Insight from the Book of Mormon Scholar. Yet there were people who knew what was in the lost manuscript. Joseph Smith had translated it. Martin Harris and members of his family had read it. Had they shared with others any of the missing text contents? Mormon had narrated the remainder of his account with occasional backward glances to his missing narrative, and the authors of what have become known as the Small Plates of Nephi that replaced this narrative had summarized it. What clues lay hidden in those accounts? If I gathered these clues like the pieces of a picture puzzle, what pictures of missing narrative would start to emerge? I assembled the known clues, dug for more, and analyzed what I'd found. Methodology for reconstructing the missing stories. The Book of Mormon's lost pages are not the first notable historical manuscript to go missing, and I am not the first scholar to attempt to reconstruct a missing text. The work of reconstructing lost texts has a long and venerable history. Scholars have many times attempted to map out missing portions of an ancient manuscript or extrapolate the overall plot of an ancient narrative from its surviving fragments or reflections in later texts. Such problems are confronted by scholars in a range of historical disciplines. Biblical scholars seek to reconstruct the J, E, P, and D strands of tradition behind the 5 books of Moses and the Q text, a common source that can be discerned behind the shared material in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Footnote 3. For a description and examples of work on the textual strands within the Pentateuch, see Richard Elliott Friedman's Who Wrote the Bible and the Hidden Book in the Bible. For work on Q, see James Robinson, Paul Hoffman, and John S. Coupling, the critical edition of Q, synopsis including the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, Mark, and Thomas, with English, German, and French translations of Q and Thomas. Classicists frequently work with fragmentary manuscripts that require a restituto textus. Footnote 4. See, for example, the papers by Mark L. Damon to discuss and cited below. Scholars of Chinese history and literature have engaged similar puzzles since at least 1772, when work began on reconstruction of the great Yongle Encyclopedia. Footnote 5. For details of this Herculean task and the emperor who decreed it, see Mark C. Elliott, Emperor Qianlong, Son of Heaven, Man of the World, regarding similar in 19th century and today to reconstruct his historic Chinese text. See Edward L. Shaughnessy, Rewriting Early Chinese Texts, Robert F. Campy, To Live as Long as Heaven and Earth, a translation and study of Gihong's tradition and divine transcendence on the reconstruction of Shenqian Zuan. Arabists and Islamicists attempt to reconstruct early Muslim sources and lost portions of medieval literary works. Footnote 6. Recovering lost texts, some methodological issues, and on the reconstruction of lost sources. Efforts to reconstruct the contents of missing texts have been made in a Book of Mormon context, with BYU religion professor S. Kent Brown having attempted to reconstruct from the Book of Mormon's internal clues what was in Lehi's personal record, spoken of by Nephi, a record that, as discussed in Chapter 6, overlaps the lost manuscript. Footnote 7. Lehi's personal record, Quest for a Missing Source, S. Kent Brown. Despite the frequency with which the problem of missing texts occurs for investigators of the past, a methodology for addressing the problem has yet to be systematically developed. As one practitioner has observed, Efforts to work out general principles of procedure for textual reconstruction have achieved only small results so far, possibly because the methods vary widely depending on the texts and because it's difficult to explain the methods used without demonstrating them in practice. Footnote 8. Company, to live as long as heaven and earth. I think that was mentioned earlier. Some of the methods used in this book developed by the author bear considerable similarity to those used in the reconstruction of classical Greek and Roman plays. A key method in both is to identify the narrative patterns or structures in other texts by the same author, for example, Mormon's Available Abridgment, or in works the author uses as models, for example, the biblical accounts of the Exodus drawn on by Mormon, and then situate the surviving fragments at the appropriate places in the structure. Thus, for example, Utah State University historian of ancient theater Mark L. Damon extrapolates missing sequences of action from gaps in the plays of He extrapolates missing sequences of action from gaps in the plays of Meander, based on how the playwright structures each sequences in his surviving plays and from ways the later playwrights modeled their own plays on meanderers. Footnote 9. Mark L. Damon, Translating Scenes, Plautus's adaptation of Meander's exapation, and also reconstructing the beginning of Meanderer's Adelphoi. Dr. Damon graciously corresponded with me about the methods he employs in his work. Another analogous problem brought to my attention by classical historian Trevor Luke would be reconstructing lost portions of the ancient Greek epic cycle. Repeated structures in Mormon's abridgment of Nephite history and the Book of Mormon's repetition of the typological structures of the Bible make it possible to similarly extrapolate from patterns of clues left for us within the published Book of Mormon's text and combine these with external sources that provide fragments of the lost narrative. Patterns in the available Book of Mormon narrative and in the way it appropriates biblical narrative provide templates for ordering the various narrative fragments into cohesive wholes. So, for instance, the presence of Mosaic Exodus pattern in the available narrative of Lehi's journey makes this narrative a plausible context into which we can plug the report from someone who interviewed Joseph Smith Sr. of the building of a tabernacle in the wilderness early in Lost Narrative, see Chapter 8. The presence in the current Book of Mormon of a brief small plates replacement for the lost manuscript provides a narrative map on which many of the fragments of the lost manuscript's narrative can be pinned to provide a fuller picture of the early Nephite narrative. So, for instance, details from extant text's narrative callbacks, such as the reference to Aminadai interpreting the writing on the wall of the temple in Alma 10:2, and from external sources, such as a statement by Martin Harris's brother about Moloch, see Chapter 14, can be added to at appropriate points to the small plates narrative. The reasoning used in this process is known as inference to the best explanation. Footnote 10. Peter Lipton's inference to the best explanation. It is also termed abductive reasoning. Inference to the best explanation, frequently used in science and the staple of historical thinking, involves developing the simplest, most elegant, comprehensive model to explain the traces of the past left to us in historical sources. While this book presents several new historical sources that are key to its reconstruction, sources I will begin introducing in chapters 6 and 7, it also makes new use of older sources. Many of these are available in Dan Vogel's enormously useful Early Mormon Documents series. Still, others appear in the Book of Mormon itself, bringing new analytical questions to these old sources. Still others appear in the Book of Mormon itself, Bringing new analytical questions to these old sources can enable them to speak afresh, disclosing previously unknown truths about the past, like an old acquaintance who has never related a certain story simply because we have never asked the right question. A philosopher of history, Robin G. Collingwood, explained, "Growth in our knowledge of the past does not come primarily through the finding of new documents. Rather, quote, the enlargement of historical knowledge comes about mainly through finding how to use as evidence this or that kind of perceived fact, which historians have hitherto thought useless to them," unquote. Footnote 11, Robin G. Collingwood, The Idea of History. Every study has its limitations. One limitation of this book is the necessary stylistic infelicity that the methodology of reconstruction requires that some evidence used in earlier reconstructions must be repeated again in later reconstructions where it is relevant. Another limitation is that the reasonable size of a single volume prevents me from laying out fully everything that can be gleaned out of the Book of Mormon's lost text from the sources I have examined thus far. The certainty of the conclusions that I can draw from those sources varies, with some, such as Ishmael's lineage from the tribe of Ephraim, approaching complete certainty, and others, such as the presence of the land of Sidon in the lost manuscript, being less certain. All historical reconstruction is probabilistic, and some facets of the past can be reconstructed with greater certainty than others. Because the models used in this book are probabilistic, they are capable of being improved indefinitely and doubtless will be over time, including by some readers of this book. Addressing both Latter-day Saint and non-Latter-day Saint audiences is next. I'm going to try and have these at 15-minute, maybe 30-minute intervals. I figure this is going to be like reading this book to you as if we were on a road trip, and I hope it helps. I'm encouraged by Don Bradley and his specific work to try and reconstruct this. I know this first chapter is a bit technical and kind of boring with explaining how he's reconstructing things, but I also know it's important, only because, he's laying out what he was doing and how he was doing it. After this, he does some acknowledgement and then actually gets into different sources, and it becomes really, really cool. So stick with me, Dad. I think you'll love this. I don't know how often I'll be able to do it. I'll try and do it somewhat daily between now and the new year, and maybe something a little more weekly later on. But I hope this finds you well, and I hope you can enjoy yourself and enjoy the book along with me. Love you lots, Dad.